listeners won't see this, but I can describe it a little bit. Like the
Oh my God,
invisible
it's the
jet
invisible jet.
from Wonder Woman. Yeah. And so you've got like this hook that comes down. So its power is like you can nab criminals and then it like snatches them back up real quick in there. And it looks, comic authentic to the invisible jet or, what you would see in the cartoon. I guess that's kind of a
Or what you
weird
don't
thing to
see in the
say. What you
cartoons.
don't see. That's exactly
Oh
right.
my goodness.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Men of Steel podcast. I'm Case Aiken, and as always, I am joined by my co-host, Jmike Fson.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show.
Jmike, how many points of articulation do you think the human body has?
We're not in school anymore. How am I supposed to know this?
I mean, it's a trick question. It kind of depends on who's manufacturing it. If it's McFarlane, it could be way more than if it's something else. But that's sort of the off the cuff lead in for us having a conversation about the toys. This is an audio format show, and so it's kind of a difficult scenario to be like, let's talk about every single aspect of the toys without doing a huge deep dive into history, because we want to have a visual component to the show.
You just gotta use your imagination.
Yeah, their imagination. But we want to talk about the toys, and so to have that conversation, we are joined by Rick Lee James.
Oh,
hey Rick, how's it going?
I'm good. Good to be here with you guys tonight. I'm so really excited to be able to talk about this.
Yeah, Rick, you do a bunch of stuff. What's the quick version of where can people find you outside?
RickLeeJames.com is probably the easiest place. Everything that I do is located on that website. So it's just my name, Rick Lee James. Just make sure you put Lee between Rick and James, or you'll get a whole other person for sure, because Rick James was a whole other guy.
Yes. It's funny because you brought that up off mic, and now I can't help but like have, just a certain articulation to how I would approach saying your name now. Certainly a certain, shall we say, suffix to it all.
That's right. That's right. That's right. It's nothing I haven't heard 1,000 times, so that's okay.
Yeah. No, but it's great that we're having you on, because we connected on, I believe it was Twitter, where we are just Superman enthusiasts and happened to connect.
Yeah.
and wanted to talk about something Superman, and you brought up the toys, and I was like, yeah, you know what, we haven't really had a conversation about the toys, but like, when I was a kid, it meant a lot to me to have like action figures for the characters, and I remember seeing the commercials and being really into the action figures that I didn't own at the time, and having that sort of shape my opinions about like what Superman was. Like, for example, so I'm a child of the 80s. I was born in 1984. So late 80s, early 90s toys are sort of like my like real target demo right there. And the Superman toy line at the time was based on the late 80s cartoon series, which featured the contrivance of Lex Luthor having the kryptonite ring. And so that always was like a thing I remembered about Lex Luthor, even though that's really only a window of like 4 years in the comics where that was like the deal for the character.
For sure.
So it's just like funny how like how much the toys of your youth imprint on you, just like core details about characters.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, well, it's interesting you would say that, because I think probably the Superpowers toys, I'm a little older. I was born in 77. So I was like right in the exact perfect age for the Superpowers toys when they were coming out. And I think I probably learned about the superheroes from the toy line first. I mean, I watched Super Friends, which led into the Superpowers Galactic Guardians, cartoon and all that. But yeah, I think a lot of, later on becoming a comic reader, I was surprised to find out, things that, because really I think a lot of what I had about the heroes was imagination, which we're kind of using tonight, people listening to the audio form of this podcast. So I really, because I have a son now, my son's 11 years old, and he's not as interested in toys as he used to be, but we kind of came through this whole phase for him where his imagination really came alive, with toys. It didn't matter what it was. And so he got to begin making stories up in his head. So in some ways, I think toys are kind of the beginning of our own, like personal fan fiction with heroes and things like that.
Yeah.
We go all over the place with them.
No, absolutely. Like that's one of the reasons why I thought it was so important that we do this conversation. Like I so strongly remember being a kid and like having these contrived scenarios with my action figures
Yes.
that were my, like you said, it's first fan fiction. It's your first like exercise in writing, in story construction, and doing the things that would become, for me, playwriting or screenwriting or dungeon mastering for D&D or anything like that, like, but for anyone, like it's the opening font of creativity, and that kind of play is so important.
Yeah, certainly. I agree with you wholeheartedly. And in fact, I can remember I loved the toys so much as a child when I actually saw some of the toys that were made then show up on the cartoon after. I think the toys sometimes came first and then the cartoons came later. And then it was like, oh, I need to adjust my playing now based upon what I'm seeing in the cartoon, that's coming out. So it's
well, yeah, I mean, we're all coming up Reagan era, so yes, the toys coming first is very much the case for all of us here. Yeah, no, I mean, like that is kind of the animal there. I mean, like my entry into superhero fiction, like I've talked about this before, is like Mighty Mouse, but then also He-Man. And like He-Man, like if you want to talk about a character that's like the toys came first.
Yep. There he is. We've got him. Listeners can't see it, but I'm holding up He-Man, the toy, in my hand right now. So
it's so wonderful seeing those classic, exactly stock body form for He-Man poses. This is just an aside, and I'm not sure if this is apocrypha or like an actual fun trivia bit, but supposedly the reason why He-Man became a thing, period, is because they had basically the mold created for a Conan the Barbarian toy line that didn't take off.
Really?
That was a tie-in to the movies, and that thus they transformed it along with like, oh, and we also had this like random like action toy, like machine toy stuff. Yeah. Like the He-Man toy line is like perfectly designed to be like, yeah, we're going to combine barbarians with also like super technology.
Yeah.
Like it's G.I. Joe plus Conan the Barbarian. And like supposedly that's actually what happened behind the scenes, is that they just had that shit, and they just were like, oh, well, we could just repaint this figure and call it a new character.
No one will ever know.
Yeah, I think you're right. We've got quite a few Masters of the Universe things around the house too, and I remember watching a documentary that was very much about that and kind of how they were doing this Conan line. It's fascinating the way these things come about, for sure, because they don't always. I'm kind of fascinated by like the way that the toys, or sometimes the shows, will influence the comics, and then the other way around too, because they all kind of work together. It's hard to have a canon unless you think of like all of them kind of working together, whether it be the old radio show Superman or the TV show. And I think always there was this influence that they were kind of grabbing ideas and working them all together, for sure. So it's fascinating to me, the whole way it comes together. And I'm trying to look as I'm standing here, just because I know I have around here somewhere the DC Comics Presents comic where Superman and He-Man show up together, which is a whole other
nice
thing together. So, but I don't think I have it out nearby me right now. I would have grabbed it just for inspiration, but.
Well, again, if this was a visual medium, then I would be like, yes, let's go get it. But in this scenario, we should probably continue on. But I think that's fair. And like, I think we need to have at least like a moment where we acknowledge how much of heroic fiction is motivated by the action figures. Mm-hmm. Like, we've talked about Power Rangers on the show. We talked about Transformers on the show. Talk about like action figure focused media that is a byproduct of all that. And we talk about it with Superman in terms of the whole DC makes more money selling Superman t-shirts than it does selling Superman comic books. Mm-hmm. Like the comic books in a certain sense wag the dog, but the dog is the merchandise line. Mm-hmm. And the toys are an extension of that. And you can definitely see that they are making big pushes into cultural relevance every time that there's like a serious toy line that pops up. Like for me, I remember really distinctly in the early 90s, like all the Death and Return of Superman toys being a big thing.
Yes.
You know, I so desperately wanted the Superboy figure because I was so into Superboy as a character. And I got Steel, and Steel was really cool. But like, you know, like there were all these figures that were like this like snapshot, because this was a moment where they were really trying to push Superman, because, you know, it was a big marketing push. Like that was the whole nature of it all. Jmike, we glossed over your history with like toys, and I'm just like kind of curious, like, do you have like a standout Superman toy that you first remember, or do you have like any particular like association with like action figures in general, but especially Superman ones?
So I'm how much younger am I than you? Like 4 years, I think, 3 or 4 years.
I think so. I was 84.
Oh, 88. Yeah, 4 years. Okay.
Yeah.
So I would have been right around the time that Mighty Morphin Power Rangers was like kicking off, like right around that time after school and everything. And the kids were out in the playground with their giant Dragon Zords and things. But I'm trying to think, like, when did I start seeing Superman action figures around? I think it was right around the time that the animated series popped up, I guess.
Yeah, which
Yeah, that was
isn't
96.
that much longer.
Yeah.
That's not that much longer after Power Rangers right there.
No.
And I was gonna say, like, that's another like moment where like there were like a lot of like tie-in action figures, you know. Like there's a direct line of Batman the movie to Batman Returns having its debacle in terms of like toys that they were able to put out there.
Yes.
Like, Jesus Christ. Talking about the Superpowers line, the Superpowers line Penguin figure is the one that they had to release when they did the Batman Returns figures, because the Batman Returns Penguin was too fucking scary.
Yeah.
So they couldn't use that figure. And so they just repackaged the one that from again, getting back to the Superpowers line, the one from that line, which is very much like the Burgess Meredith, like 60s Penguin, like whack, 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 whack kind of style.
I always want to call him the Hostess Fruit Pies Penguin, because you know they had all those ads back in the day, and it was that penguin that would always show up in the ads, you know, which he works perfect for Hostess Fruit Pies or whatever it was the Hostess was advertising, because he looks like he eats a lot of Hostess, you know, so that works great. But yeah, excellent point. Yeah, the toys get used and reused in the models several different times from that Superpowers line in many different iterations.
Well, but then what I was saying is like, then there's like a direct line in terms of the toy sales, like pushing actual action figure lines. Like, so, and that being related to additional media. So like from the toys of Batman Returns. So like Batman Returns, for example, is the source material for Batman, the animated series. Like, you know, we had the two Tim Burton ones, and that's why there is like vague design similarities. Obviously, they shift them for like Catwoman, for example, like why she's a blonde in the cartoon, like is all directly like going back to the Batman Returns like tie-in to it all. It was like launching directly in the wake of it, and like you see a toy line coming off of that. And the combined success of the toys and the show is why we get a Superman line of show that has its own toy line stuff. And like there's definitely toyetic elements of the 90s animated Superman show, you know, like he's got a rocket ship and he's got all the different suits. Like, sure, there's practical reasons in the show, but like that's a toy thing, right? You know?
Yeah. Well, they didn't have the Justice Jogger though that Superpowers had. I still wonder about that one still to this day. Are you familiar with the Justice Jogger from the Superpowers line?
No.
You ever see that?
The Justice Jogger? No.
The Justice Jogger. If you ever look up the picture sometime, I have no idea what they were trying to do with it, or it almost looks like some kind of a Star Wars Walker character or something, but you could put Superman inside of it. And on the box, you'll still see him from time to time when I'm at Comic-Cons or something. I will see the Justice Jogger when you find it. But if you ever look up a picture of it, you'll just be like, what in the world? Like,
yeah, I'm looking at it now. Like,
yeah, it's crazy. Like, what in the world is a Justice Jogger? So yeah, it's a fun one to look at though, and it probably goes for a lot of money. I haven't looked them up on eBay or anything, but I have a feeling because there were a lot of them made, they probably go for a pretty penny.
Oh wow, yeah, no, it's wild. the toy line there. All right, so let's actually like focus a little bit in on the Superpowers toy line, because you
Okay.
brought it up and I immediately was like, yeah, that makes sense as like the good one to talk about. It's arguably the most famous line of superhero toys that have ever come out. Like, just, as opposed to being like the tie-in toy to a thing, like it was a line of toys. And you mentioned earlier the cartoon spinoff, and thank you, because that's also an area that we're gonna have to like talk about, because like that's a big reminder for me. But like the Superpowers toy line has that name for a very specific reason, which is that the decision was to have the action figures all do a thing, to like have a thing that represents the superpower, and rather than have it be like here's a switch or a pull string or something like that, there's a physical motion you can make on them that will cause them to do an effect. So like in Superman's case, squeeze his legs and his arms will like go up and down to
Right.
punch.
Yeah, I'm holding him right now. Listeners can't see it, but mine still works where you squeeze Superman's legs and his arms. It kind of looks like he's jogging, actually, for sure. But yeah, very, very much. They all have these powers. That's one thing that the
Talk about a Justice jogger right
yeah,
there.
that's right. That's right. And that's one thing I kind of miss about the new line of superpowers that McFarlane's come out with, which are pretty great in some ways, but they don't have any sort of action that I'm aware of, unless it's like really hidden and no one's ever talked about it, because I can't
Oh, they
find
don't?
it.
That's lame. I
No,
like, what's the point of like putting out a new superpowers line if they don't have the superpowers part?
yeah. Well, my understanding was that McFarlane grew up with the toys too, and that he was, aside from knowing he could make money from it, was, there's a real nostalgia there for the toys that they had. I don't know if it's just too complicated to make them. I'm not sure of any McFarlane toys that come to mind that have any sort of action like that. Maybe there are some and I'm not aware, but I guess that's just not a McFarlane thing in the way that he makes the toys. I think they're much more. I think that the original Superpowers line was definitely for play. That's why like people who are my age, who I'm on the back end of the 40s now, is justice jogging to 50, but the toys then were really made to be playable. Those powers that each of them have, whether it was Superman and Batman having their. I think Batman had a very similar one. I've got it in here. I can't remember.
Yeah, his was a bat punch.
Yeah, Bat Punch. The
Yeah.
the one that I have doesn't. It's kind of lost his punch, so he's not quite doing the thing he did at one time, but still, very cool. I'm not sure what kind of mechanisms inside. You can probably fix them at some point, because I've got it in my hand, the Batman, when I can still feel the mechanics like moving inside when I move the arm and stuff. But they definitely put some thought into like what to do. I know Robin had a karate chop, that when you squeeze his legs together,
Yep.
but and Brainiac's power was his arm would break off when you would squeeze it, because they were like the worst made toys ever. And I rarely ever see a Brainiac that doesn't have a broken arm, because mine, like immediately when I took it out of the box as a kid, I remember, oh, now he's going to fight Superman. So I'd go to make him kick Superman and his arm just broke right off. And so,
well, we should note that the Brainiac design is the George Perez like skeletal robot version of the character, which is cool. It's like a snapshot in history. Same with the Lex Luthor being the green battle armor version of the character.
Yeah.
Who also had a punch ability. We should just read down the list real quickly of at least like series 1. Aquaman was a deep sea kick. Batman was a bat punch. Brainiac was a computer kick. The Flash was lightning legs, which I'm assuming is a kick. Green Lantern was ring thrust, which I'm assuming is the punch. Hawkman was flight wings, which I believe was like squeeze legs and wings flap, I think was the deal on that one.
Mm-hmm.
The Joker was Madcap Mallet, which I think he had like a hammer that he could swing with it, and so it's like the punch but just coming down. Lex Luthor was nuclear punch. The Penguin was umbrella arm, which I'm gonna guess was coming down but with the umbrella instead of a hammer. Robin, Dick Grayson, was karate chop, which again is going to be the same motion as like coming up and down. Superman is just punch. That's like how Wikipedia has him listed, not super punch or anything, just punch. And Wonder Woman is deflector bracelet, which I believe is the two arms going up and down. Mm-hmm. It is going across.
It's
that's pretty cool.
It does. She does actually cross arms. Yeah. So
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
That it must be similar then to like in the series too, like Darkseid has quote unquote a raging motion when you activate him.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like it's a cool gimmick that like you do a thing to them and they do like something that's like kind of in character for the character.
Yeah. Yeah. It was, they were very cool in that respect. They didn't have as many points of like articulation as they do today. But again, I think that's part of the beauty of the toy, leaving a lot to the imagination. I don't even remember when I was a kid, if I can remember back that far. I don't remember the superpower being like the big selling point for me that they had, other than it was just like, oh man, I love these heroes. They're so great. But man, they did a lot of great toys. There must be something about that era of toys too, because to this day it still seems like people that had them, they're either really clung on to them or they tried to get them back again, or a lot of their, and it might be even just some of the artwork and stuff, because Jose Luis Garcia Lopez, praise be his name, as we often say, I think he designed most of them too. So a lot of the art just became very iconic from that as well. So
yeah, well, and that makes sense because he was doing a lot of like the official artwork for like the DC like in-house official artwork for all the characters was him.
yeah, very much so. I kind of lost the train of thought I was going with. So yeah. Anyway, they were really an interesting toy line though, in that I'm kind of fascinated about how like they came about from the cartoon too, because I think the cartoon going all the way back to, what was it, the late 70s with the Super Friends cartoon. I think it all just continued in one to the next, because I've got all these seasons on DVDs, and so I've tried to like watch them in order over the years just to see like the progression, and the art gets better as it goes along. And I'm almost certain now, I can't remember for sure. I'm almost certain my first experience probably was like watching Super Friends reruns or something during the week or on a Saturday morning. And I got really excited when I would see, in my mind at that age, I probably couldn't have articulated that like, oh, the art's getting better and it's looking more like the comics and things. But there was definitely a point in that overlap when it was just exciting to see all of them kind of matching up together. I don't know that was always the case. Like if you've ever been to someplace that has a lot of Superman specifically memorabilia and things, if you go to like the in Metropolis, Illinois, I don't know if any of you have ever been there before, but the museum they have there, it's amazing to see kind of the history of everything involving Superman. And a lot of times the toys didn't really look a lot like what you were seeing in the comics, or a lot like what you were seeing on the TV show, other than they just had the S and a different suit. But there were so many different lines. But I almost think maybe the Superpowers line was one of the first ones they did that did have the sculpt and the mold to them that made them look like they were kind of coming out of the comics or coming out of the TV show. And maybe that's why they just filled the imagination of so many kids at that time, to where still we'll look back and everybody kind of has their own Superman that, like, for them, they look back and go like, oh, that's Superman. And for me, that era from like the 80s Superpowers line, that's kind of what I always think of when I think of like my Superman and my preferred, the kind of era that I like.
Yeah, well, and that makes a ton of sense considering like when this line came out. Like this is smack dab in the midst of like really iconic stuff going on for the characters. Like this is coming out like 84 to 86, so that is matching up pretty well with like really big moments in DC Comics. Like I've seen ads for that, like I'm, if this wasn't in the actual issues of Crisis on Infinite Earths, these were in like all the Crisis tie-ins. Like the ads for the superpower lines were all over during like hugely influential like periods, with like artists and writers just working on all cylinders to both wrap up like the classic era of DC Comics and launch the new era. So like you see, really definitive versions of the characters. Like, I can't talk about Ultraman, for example, like the evil Superman from Earth 3, without talking about the way he dies in Crisis, and like how like him having like such a wonderful send off in that is such a moment of like, yeah, no, that is what you expect of the evil Superman in a world-ending crisis. Like it was the definitive moment for that character, and this toy line, like again, is here's a snapshot of this like really like iconic era for the books.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I've actually got one of those comics in my hands right now that has the Superpowers ad on the back of it, and it didn't actually
Hmm.
occur to me until you just mentioned this because the Lex Luthor power suit that he has actually that I somewhere around here I've got a comic where that first appears and we see that. I think he was on the planet Lexor or something, and I think it must have come out before the Superpowers toy line did. But it's interesting when you look at like the ads that are on the back of the comic books, you actually see a cartoon image of Lex Luthor being punched by a toy version of Superman. So
Right.
it really is like, the comic being, or the toy leaping into the comic, or the vice versa. I'm not sure exactly how
Yeah.
that's supposed to work, but it's very interesting the way the planning that would have to go into that and the marketing. I think now we have toys all the time, that are it seems like if somebody appears in one issue, they make a toy of it anymore. But it was a
Or
lot
at
more
least a pop
rare.
figure.
Yeah, it's a pop figure or something for sure. But back then, I think it was much more rare to find things like that. So it is kind of cool to get to see that kind of pop off the page. So much so that I remember having like trauma is probably not the right word, but reading like Crisis on Infinite Earths and not realizing like, oh man, people are dying in this. Like heroes are Flash. What happened to Flash? Like, sorry if I spoiled that for anybody from 40 years ago or whatever. But it
Oh,
was
it's okay. Jeff Johns reverse spoiled it, so it's fine.
but yeah, it was really shocking kind of, like to read the comics and some of the high stakes that they had in that era, but they're kind of looking like the Superpowers figures. So it was an interesting introduction to like real stakes for me because I don't even think they were allowed to like say on the cartoon whatever the rules were for broadcasting at that time in children's shows. I don't think they were allowed to punch each other or nobody could like really get hurt or anything. So it's kind of fascinating to me that the cartoons were kind of like interesting because it seemed like they would take a lot of the drama out because there couldn't really be stakes. So when something would actually happen in those shows, I can remember playing with the toys, just my kid imagination coming back to me right now, seeing some of those like dangerous things in the comics and kind of being introduced to that as a kid and like playing that out kind of with the toys a little bit. It's kind of to me an interesting look at human development and kind of how we grow and how we deal with things that we're experiencing maybe in the world. And I wonder if that isn't always the case with children. I think play is kind of the serious business of childhood, where we're working out how the world works. And I feel fortunate to have kind of grown up in an era where Superman was admired by children and heroes who were not anti-heroes. And I haven't really got anything against anti-heroes, but the heroes I learned about from this era, from these toys, from those comics at that time, even the show, were people who were actually good people who wanted to do good in the world. They weren't doing it begrudgingly. They weren't sad about it. It was a very, you know, it was a very real thing that like, good guys did this, and it wasn't like their strength wasn't that they had strength. Their strength was that they had strength and they used it for good, which,
Yeah.
kind of to me to this day as an adult, hopefully values that I have. I think some of that probably formed, from those early days in childhood playing with these toys.
Crazy how that's such a unknown concept these days that good people like to do good things for other people.
Hmm. Yeah.
Well, definitely true. But I want to focus on the play aspect there. I think that we were saying that toys is like such an avenue for creativity and for storytelling and for like cinematography to a certain degree. Like think this is not the Superpowers toy line cartoon spinoff, but like think about Challenge of the Super Friends with like the Legion of Doom. Like think
Yeah.
about the stakes that were presented in that when you have this like rival organization with Bizarro and Solomon Grundy and like like all these like heavy hitters in it. Like the concept that you could like put out there is a truly menacing rivalry or like that that could be like this impressive physical display, and it leaves it to the kids when they're home with the toys to like actually like act out the actual like real like matchup between Superman and Bizarro.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like a thing that's like highlighted in the cartoons, and that continues on into the Superpowers line. But I do super want to agree with you that like the art style gets so much better, but you can see that it's a continuity of the Super Friends show. And like when it was like in syndication, like for me in syndication on Cartoon Network, early in the Cartoon Network like period, when they had like all the Hanna-Barbera stuff, but didn't have like any of their own like original programming blocks yet, or like stuff that they had like really like got that was like, you know, foreign releases or anything like that. Like when Cartoon Network was just like, we've got the Hanna-Barbera back catalog, here you go. Like for me, that was my introduction to the Super Friends stuff, and the ones I loved the most was the Superpowers cartoon.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to bring this little detail up, which is that Jmike, do you understand the importance of the Superpowers cartoon for a serious thing that we talk about on this show?
To be fair, this is the first time I'm actually hearing about this cartoon.
Okay,
because when I saw it, I was like, "Oh snap! I was going to say it. Super Friends. It's a Super Friends cartoon." And I was like, "Wait, superpowers?" I was like, "But they look like," and I was like, "Wait, Cyborg."
Yes, thank you you have locked on to the exact detail that I was about to bring up.
Like, I'm sorry, Rick. I have a beef with Cyborg for a number of reasons, but
Jmike, have you ever wondered why Cyborg was put on the Justice League in the New 52?
I'm pretty sure it's because of this. They're just like, oh, hey, remember that one time?
100% because of this. It is 100% because this is the era that Geoff Johns loves to harken back to. And guess who was dictating some of the lineup changes?
Oh, Geoff Johns?
Yep.
Oh, great. Awesome.
And this is an area where like the beef is real, because in the Superpowers cartoon, Cyborg and Firestorm were like the two young heroes that like just joined to be like the, you know, the audience surrogate characters. Like we're viewing the world through these two like younger heroes around these like much more established characters. It's so head scratching that they decided to make Cyborg a founder of the Justice League, but it all comes back to this, because this is that era that Geoff Johns has like sees as being like the classic Justice League, and this is,
oh my gosh,
yeah, exactly. So I just wanted to make sure that we were clear about the stakes involved in what we're talking about today.
Well, while Rick was talking, I was like, I feel like this was just like a Super Friends spinoff, and I was like, wait, no, Robin's here too, and like Firestorm, and I was like, oh, Cyborg's here too. Yep. Oh my god. Interesting. Cool. Well, this is where he got it from.
Yep.
Awesome. Okay. Now I know.
And I'm pretty certain too that was my introduction to Cyborg, because I think I probably thought as a kid that they made him up for the cartoon and not realizing, you know, Teen Titan orders and stuff. I just don't think I had read the Teen Titan comics at the time when the Superpowers Galactic Guardians cartoon was on. I think that's the official title of it.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, that wouldn't be the first time. I mean, like the Super Friends cartoon is infamous for the number of characters that they invented. Yeah. Or slightly like shaved off the serial numbers and then like, you know, made Black Lightning, Black Vulcan, like those kind of situations.
Yeah. What on earth? Why was he Black Vulcan instead of that's just kind of funny.
It's a rights issue.
Is it Star Trek now with Black Vulcan and all that stuff? It's interesting. But yeah, and then it was interesting too that like you know, in some ways, I think it was a Super Friends spinoff too. I mean, it was kind of like the continuation with better art in the cartoon in some ways. At least much more. It was much more like comic books, you know. Whenever you would read it of that era, and I can remember a few that originally I think only were in Super Friends. Like was it Samurai? I think was one of them who was a Super Friends toy.
Yeah, Samurai was an El Diablo, I think was the other one, or something.
Yeah, I don't know if they ever actually had that toy made, but yeah, he was one that they made in the cartoon. And then there was, like you said already, Black Vulcan, and who was the Native American neck chunk,
Oh,
you know,
Apache Chief. Yeah.
Apache Chief. That's right.
Yeah. Well, and like the way, sadly, for me to like keep them all straight in my head is that the Justice League Unlimited had the parody team that Cadmus created.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was like the Wonder Twins parodies. It was Moon Shadow, I think was what they called the Apache Chief like parody in that.
Yeah.
Wind Dragon was the samurai one. And then I forget what the El Diablo one was. I'm blanking on some of the details. Yeah. But anyway, it is funny like how those like elements have like lived on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that they're like getting into the McFarlane toy line. I wouldn't be surprised because it seems like they're just making versions of every superhero iteration you could think of. I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing some of those kind of obscure characters that, you know, only made an appearance in the cartoon start coming in the Superpowers, the new Superpowers line that McFarlane has been doing. Because I think that's kind of his goal, is to make heroes that they intended to make, but then toy sales dropped off and then they just kind of discontinued the line. But what's kind of strange to me about like McFarlane characters though is and some of them kind of look like the original Superpowers line, and then some of them are just completely different and modern era.
Well, I'm like looking at the list right now, and they've got like the Batman Who Laughs and the Batman of Zur in R. You know, you've got Kilowog in here. You've definitely got like some strange choices, or at least Justice Lord's Superman.
Yeah,
you know, so like there's certainly like outside influences like creeping in. Tim Drake, Thomas Wayne version of Batman. So, you know, plenty of variations in there. It's not just a re-release of all the classic lines, which is interesting. But at the same time, I'm mad to find out that they don't goddamn do the action part. Like that was the thing.
Yeah, it was a little disappointing when I opened the box on the first one. Although some things are like really cool about them. Like the one thing I really like that, like, I feel like they did some corrections on some of them, because I've got, again, you're not going to see this at home. It's just for my visualization for myself, but I'm holding in my hands both the original Superman and Supermobile from the Superpowers Kenner line, and I also have the Superman and Supermobile from the McFarlane line. And the Supermobile from the original Kenner one doesn't look a lot like the one that was in the comics, you know, that has which is honestly kind of goofy and cool at the same time, because it has those fists, you know.
I love it. Like listeners, he's articulating the punching fists of the Supermobile, and it is great. It's got the bubble dome seat for Superman to like get into. It looks so comics authentic.
Yeah, which I think that's really cool. That like I feel like they got a second chance to go back and like, oh no, the comics at the time actually had this Supermobile that you can't hold, like, you know, if memory serves, in the comics that it showed up when I think he was fighting Amazo, and that's why he needed the Supermobile. It seems like Amazo had taken like Superman's powers, so the Supermobile actually could hold kryptonite in its fist, you know, so it could take on Amazo, who would take it on Superman's power. So that's why he needed the protection of the ship. But I think things are pretty neat like that. It's like, hey, we didn't quite get this as kids, and we wanted it. I almost feel like that's what McFarlane is doing, is like, I always wanted this toy and it never got made, so doggone it, I'm gonna make it now.
Yeah.
So what I feel like the difference is the vehicles have really cool like superpowers. So you've got the Superman one that has the punching action, and then you also have, again, listeners won't see this, but I can describe it a little bit. Like the
oh my god, it's the invisible jet
from Wonder Woman. Yeah, and so you've got like this hook that comes down. So its power is like you can nab criminals, and then it like snatches them back up real quick in there, and it looks, you know, comic authentic to the invisible jet, or, you know, what you would see in the cartoon. I guess that's kind of
or what you don't see in the cartoons.
What you don't see. That's exactly right.
Oh my God.
But it is interesting to me that the vehicles are the things with the superpowers in this line. I can't get that back where it goes. But then you have even like thing, which looks kind of goofy at first, but it's one of my favorite toys, is like their whirly bat that they just made, which they, you know, that was an old Batman thing. They had a whirly bat in the comics.
Mm-hmm.
the Whirly Bat has the action, like makes the propeller go, and you can fit, whatever superhero you want in there. I've got the Black Batman from the McFarlane line in mine right now, and then there's a couple others. I don't have all of them, but the new Batmobile that they do reminds me a lot of the first Superpowers when it has things that like the battering ram in the front that pushes out.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and then I've got the it kind of looks like the Superpowers cartoon and line Batmobile, but for you guys to see, here's the original one right here with Batman and Robin in it, and here's the new one. So they are similar. They have different functions, but yeah, I don't know why they chose to do that, but I think the vehicles are kind of like the best part of the new line for sure, and why they got the action and the superpowers and the figures didn't, I don't know, but that seems to be what they did with them for sure.
That's so fascinating. Like those vehicles are so cool. Like they're awesome.
Yeah. Even my wife, who really doesn't even care about the toys and stuff, she looks at these and my son and I will go up and share, look what this toy does, and she's like, wow, that's really that's awesome. So
yeah. Oh, listeners, like this is such a cool Batmobile, such a cool invisible jet, and such a cool Supermobile. It's wild that is such a juxtaposition with while the figures are cool, it's just like kind of like a bummer that they removed what I am sure is like the most prone to failure part of like the Superpowers figures, which is the action component. Like, you talked about how like the Batman, you can really tell what it does necessarily.
Yeah.
And that's fair. Like, if you want to have figures that don't have that, and then like the larger vehicle stuff like are probably less prone to failure, if I had to guess. Like, so maybe that's where they try to make up for it.
Could be.
I don't know. It's like, it's just interesting that they have such cool ones. And then like, again, it's cool. It's cool that you can get like a Superpowers style Deathstroke. It's cool that you can get Wally West or Thomas Wayne or, any of these characters in this style. You can get Justice Lord Superman with a removable cape.
Yeah. It's true. I do like that they went the cloth route with the capes on the outfits, because a lot of modern ones don't do that. They kind of have the hard plastic, and they still went with the original way that they did. I think Penguin might have been one of the only ones that didn't have, like, it wasn't exactly a cape that Penguin had, but the original like Penguin character has like the tails on his suit that were hard. They didn't flap around. and Joker kind of had that too, where it was kind of like a hard the hard plastic, but the capes themselves in the original line and the new one are a lot alike, which I like that part of for sure.
Yeah, it's certainly very cool stuff. Very fun stuff. I am looking at the list of like what McFarlane has put out versus the original, and now I'm like, oh, there was a Shazam one. I might have to go digging into eBay for that one. It has a Thunder Punch and a removable cape.
I had the Shazam as a kid. Actually, I had almost all of them. I think the only one I didn't have was Cyborg and maybe one other, because they just made so few. Like a lot of kids, I think I sold mine in a garage sale for 50 cents or something. And now I look back and I'm like, that Shazam cost $300. I can't believe I let that one go. But the Shazam one was very cool.
I'm laughing now because I'm like, I feel like I've seen these characters before somewhere, and I'm like, oh wait, I know exactly where I've seen a lot of these things. Robot Chicken.
Oh yeah.
And I was like,
yes.
Oh yes. Oh, thank you for bringing that up, because that is an area that we have to talk about as well.
I was like, oh right, that's where I've seen a lot of these characters before, or the action figures before.
Yeah, no, we have to talk about that. So Robot Chicken, which listeners, I hope you're familiar with. If you're not familiar with. Not to be like, oh God, you have to go check this out. But Robot Chicken is a long-running sketch comedy show on Adult Swim, where they use claymation figures, but often are either the original toys from specifically like Seth Green's era, or his like childhood era, or they're modeled to look like it. And so every time they do superhero stuff, they tend to do the Superpowers line on that show. So yeah, it's super familiar in that regard.
And the Mego characters too. They use Mego characters a lot too. But yeah, those shows are great. The specials that they do are hilarious.
Yeah. So that's definitely a fun one right there. Sorry, now I'm on eBay looking up Captain Marvel superpowers figure.
Don't do it, Case. Save yourself.
No. All right. So that's not what we should be doing right now. Anyway, so getting back to the toys. Yeah, I feel like we've covered a lot about it, and I don't know, Jmike, was there anything else that you wanted to like sort of discuss in relation to the superpowers line?
No, except that these things tend to be really expensive, like Rick said. Like, they tend to be like, you're like, oh, well, maybe I'll find something on eBay, something from my childhood. And you're like, you open up the page, and it's like, oh, $350.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's like the baseline price. And it's like, some of these can go for almost $1,000. You're like, oh, wow, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
Ooh. Truly.
You're still looking at Shazam things, aren't you?
I am. Sorry. I can't help it. It's really cool.
Yeah.
He's been hooked.
Yeah, Rick. So I love Superman, but I will say that the Shazam Captain Marvel is my all-time favorite comic book character.
It is. No, hey, that's all right. It's a good one. So I think you should go for the one that is special to you. Is the one that's the best one all the time. So, well, I had a couple more things that came to mind about Superpowers.
Oh yeah, by all means.
It was interesting to me too that they have, and I have a couple things here again, just for so I don't forget, but I'll show you on camera, but I've got like these 4 VHS tapes that Superpowers came out with at the time when I was a kid. And like there's a Superman one that they had, there's an Aquaman one, there's a Batman one, and then there's Superboy, which is interesting that they had a Superboy superpowers line. They didn't have like a Superboy toy at all. So it was interesting, like their choice for doing that.
Well, the Superboy toy is you just hold the Superman one just a little bit further away from you.
That's right. He's just a little bit smaller. But like the cartoons they featured there were not, I don't believe, I haven't watched them in a while, but I don't think they were the Super Friends line at all. I think they were ones from like way back when, like maybe the 50s and 60s cartoons, and then some.
Well, there was the 60s New Adventures of Superman, which I believe had the Superboy cartoon line as well as part of that. Man, our friends over at Digging for Kryptonite, Anthony Desiato over there is currently doing like a deep dive into like Superboy lore, and I'm like so like fascinated by like to ride along on that experience, and we'll have to do it at some point because like the ingrained in like entrenched mythology of Superboy in like the marketing and like it's so fascinating just like how many Superboy shows there have been, counting Smallville, but like how many Superboy shows there have been. Like this is just like Superman when he was young. We're gonna just do a TV show that we're gonna do a cartoon of that, we're gonna do a live action of that, like we're gonna just keep doing this like same basic concept. It's just so fascinating that like how like impactful that character was, to the point that it like continued to like even in spinoff material that didn't actually have a figure for him, they were like, yeah, we'll use Superboy in it.
That's right. That's for sure. Well, and it kind of was, I think the concept they were originally wanting to go for with like Batman Beyond was, I think Bruce Timm, I think they even said when they approached him about the idea is they wanted like basically Batboy, like, can you show us Batman when he was a boy? And they were like, I don't know if that works exactly right. So Superboy has definitely been one of those characters and all the iterations for sure that has lasted a long time. And then I just have one other thing I wanted to show you. I enjoyed your episode where you did I think it was the Calling Superman game.
Yeah.
That's kind of like one of my things I'd love to have someday, but I can never find a reasonably priced copy because they're pretty expensive when you find them. And then I wouldn't want to open it up and play them. But they also had a Superpowers board game that
nice.
And they had it's called the Justice League of America Skyscraper Caper, and it's a 3-dimensional game. Actually, it takes some work to get it built because it has all these like cardboard pieces and things, but then they had little plastic figures inside of each of the superpowers, or not all of them, but several of the main superpowers characters. And so you played like these different sized skyscrapers basically. And the game was you had to knock your opponent off the buildings by, rolling the exact amount of right spaces and things. But that was another thing that as a kid, I really enjoyed all the tie-ins that came along with the toys. It's in some ways like the snake eating its tail with all the merchandise, the toys, the games, and everything. You don't know where one starts and the other begins. But that was just another really big part. And yeah, so it kind of, there was just a lot of different iterations, and not even to mention like the coloring books and things like that, pencil toppers and watches. I mean, it was so huge. It just seems like it was ubiquitous back when I was a little kid. That Superpowers was everywhere.
Yeah. Again, like the toy line itself was like extremely popular, and like to the point where it's pushing out the show and not the other way around,
Mm-hmm.
and where like the action figures are used again, a Robot Chicken, where we're seeing those ads and like it remembering them because they just hit right at the like the perfect time for like these big moments in comic books. Again, like it's coming, like I don't know what ads were being published in the original issues of Watchmen. I've only owned trades of Watchmen, but like it wouldn't be out of the question for a Superpowers like ad to be on the back cover of one of the issues of Watchmen, like just because of like when the window of time that this toy line was being advertised in DC stuff was when DC was putting out some fucking bangers out there.
Yeah.
So it had an impact on the culture. And again, I'm really glad that we had a chance to talk about this. Rick, thank you for bringing this topic on.
Well, thank you. My goodness, I've been looking forward to this because I just never get a chance to talk about Superman and superpowers and stuff with people. I'm always doing other things in my day job, and my wife loves me, but it's just not something we talk about that much. So this is really fun to get to hang out with you guys and just express my love for all things Superman and superheroes.
Yeah, man. You mentioned your day job and you've got other stuff going on. So where can people find you, follow you? Like what should people know about you, and what have you got to plug?
Yeah, well, I actually run a Superman Twitter account. You can just look up Superman Always, and I just started doing that one for fun probably a couple years ago. And literally, I just post things about Superman. I think it's under like technically Rick Lee James 4, the number 4, if you have trouble finding it. But that's where we met online, and I literally just, it's kind of like the one happy place on Twitter that I enjoy going to. There's not really, if there's anybody fighting, they're just fighting about like Superman related things, not necessarily like real world politics or anything. So I enjoy that. So you can find me there. I'm also a musician. I'm a part of the Grammys Recording Academy, so I'm a singer and songwriter. For many years, I kind of did that as my day job. But lately, I'm still doing that somewhat, but just really less than I used to. That especially since the pandemic hit a few years back, which that kind of changed everything in the world in a lot of ways, how we do things for sure. But I actually work in my day job as a hospital chaplain now, believe it or not, and find it to be really fulfilling work, sitting with people, hearing their stories, and just trying to walk with them through very difficult days. So I'm very interested in a lot of different things, but that's been some of the most fulfilling and, dare I say, even heroic work I think I've ever done, sometimes being with people in some of their very difficult moments, and also in some very great joys too. I get to be there in good things too. You don't always think about that side in hospital work. But if anybody wants to know more about me, what I do, or even listen to my music on Spotify or Apple Music or YouTube, rickleejames.com is my website. And I'd love to just, if somebody can send me an email or a tweet or whatever. I'd love to meet up. And anybody ever wants to talk about superheroes or Superman, I've got tons of comics. I've been a comic book guy for many years, as long as I can remember. So thank you honestly, really, thank you for having me on tonight, because this has just been so much fun for me to just kind of nerd out and enjoy myself and talk about
Yeah,
some
man.
things that bring me happiness.
Well, hey, we'll have to have you back to talk about like a comic or something else. But this was a good, like, yeah, we'll talk about the fucking toys.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
man.
great. I have loved it. Thank you so much. This is so much fun.
Excellent, excellent. Well, again, people should look up all the stuff you've got going on. Again, your Twitter account is how we connected in the first place, and it's, yeah, like I agree. Like this is why this is why I kind of hate what's happening to Twitter right now, which is that like what I had cultivated into a world of positivity for myself, which was like my comics Twitter,
Yeah.
has eroded somewhat in the recent years, as management has made people not want to be on Twitter as much as they used to, which is probably a healthy thing, but at the same time, I miss my comics Twitter existing the
I
same way.
agree. Yeah, I agree.
But your account has been one of the nice bright spots in the more recent times, and I do very much appreciate that. In the meantime, Jmike, where can people find you and follow you?
Oh my gosh. On Twitter at Jmike101. I occasionally respond to all cases, diatribes, and things, and I try to respond with funny memes and gifs occasionally.
Yeah, well, you do a great job. Your gift game is always on point.
I try.
But if they want to get in touch with us or with me directly, you should check out our Discord server. We've got one for certain POV, which you can find links in our show notes or all over our website. It's a great time, and you know we're all hanging out there. Me more than Jmike, but Jmike will respond if you add him.
Like you're calling me out here.
Yes,
Case.
I am. Meanwhile, you can come at me, bro, on most of the platforms with the at me signs at Case Aiken, except for Instagram, where I am hanging on to my AIM screen name from high school for dear life, where you can find me at Quetzalcoatl5 because I was pretentious and also did not care if you had trouble spelling it because I was dumb. So find me there, but also find the stuff that we're working on our YouTube channel. The Certain POV Media YouTube account has grown in leaps and bounds, and a lot of that has been stuff that I've been putting on there. So we've got our full podcast episodes on there, as well as my Superman Analogs video. And recently I have actually like jumped into doing Dungeons and Dragon videos, specifically talking about the revisions in the 2024 New Player's Handbook and what that means for the old subclasses that we saw in all of the various books that have been published in the last decade of Dungeons and Dragons. So check out those videos. I just put up the third one today as of us recording this, which is on the Barbarian, and they had some really fun subclasses to talk about. So but after you check out all the other great shows on our networks, shows like Fun and Games with Matt and Geoff, Matt, our former editor, and Geoff, our also former editor, do a great show talking about video games. So check that out. Check out their side quest series, and then circle back to the feed here for our next show. But until then, stay super, man.
Men of Steel is a Certain POV production. Our hosts are Jmike Fson and Case Aiken. The show is edited by Sophia Ricciardi. Our logo is by Chris Batista, and episode art is by Case Aiken. Our theme is by Jeff Moonen.
Video games are a unique medium.
They can tell stories,
Immerse us in strange, fantastic worlds.
blur the very boundaries of our reality.
But at the end of the day, video games are fun. Whatever fun is to you.
I'm Jeff Moonen,
And I am Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
and on Fun and Games, we talk about the history, trends, and community of video games.
It's a celebration of all the games we play and all the fun we find within them.
And there's so many more games out there, so we hope you'll share in that conversation with us.
Fun and Games podcast with Matt and Geoff. Find us on certainpov.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
And happy gaming.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.